may also know Thaddeus as Jude, as he is called in John's Gospel. Yet others of you may know him as Lebbaeus, which is the name Matthew and Mark use for him in their Gospels. His name, Lebbaeus, means heart child, suggesting that he had a tender, gentle spirit about him. The Bible does not record much about Lebbaeus Thaddeus. However, early tradition suggests that after Pentecost, Lebbaeus Thaddeus took the gospel message north to Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Turkey. There are numerous accounts of how he healed the king of Odessa, the royal city of Mesopotamia. While we do not know as much about Thaddeus as we do many of the other disciples, we cannot discount the faithful service and sacrifice of this quiet, gentle follower of Jesus Christ. Thomas, also called Didymus, may be known to some of you as Doubting Thomas. Thomas has been a carpenter like Jesus before joining the group of apostles. While he may have been a man of wavering faith at times, his devotion to Jesus was sincere. When Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus that their brother Lazarus was dead, and Jesus beckoned the disciples to go with him, it was Thomas who urged the fearful disciples, "Let's go with Jesus, even if it means to die with him." And because of Thomas' prompting, they all saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the tomb. After Jesus' crucifixion, Thomas stayed away from the other disciples for a while. When he returned, they shared the news with him that Jesus had risen. In true Thomas fashion, he replied, "I will not believe it until I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my fingers into them and place my hand into his side." When Jesus appeared to Thomas and the others in the upper room, and he called Thomas by name, Thomas knew that Jesus was his Lord and God. Thomas' belief was so strong, he gave his life as a martyr for faith in Jesus. Judas was the other disciple that came from Galilee. Judas was from the village of Cairoth in Judea, so this is why he is known as Judas Iscariot. Judas served as the treasurer for the original 12 disciples. Judas is the most notorious and infamous of all the disciples. His name has become synonymous with words like traitor and betrayer. Judas' decision to become a disciple was one based on a personal gain rather than a spiritual calling. From the beginning, his focus was on how he could make more money. He was baffled and angered when Mary washed Jesus' feet with expensive ointment and perfume. How could she have wasted so much money? His greed and love of money ultimately led him to his demise as a disciple when he betrayed Jesus and sold him to the religious authorities for 30 pieces of silver. He led the angry mob to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he betrayed Jesus and identified him to the mob with a kiss. With this simple kiss began the events that eventually led to Jesus' crucifixion and the death on the cross. Simon is often referred to as Simon the Zealot because he belonged to a fierce political group known as the Zealots. Before Jesus called him, he was a hot-headed and bloodthirsty revolutionary. He wanted people to rise up in armed rebellion against Rome and to reestablish the glorious kingdom of Israel of David and Solomon. But Jesus told of another kind of kingdom, the kingdom of the human heart, where God is the supreme ruler. After meeting Jesus, Simon unconditionally surrendered himself. Simon's original motivation for following Jesus may have been similar to that of Judas, simply for political and personal gain. However, unlike Judas, Simon became transformed by the power of Jesus' love, and his fierce passion for Israel's political well-being was expressed as sincere devotion to Jesus Christ and his desire to love all people. James, son of Zebedee, the older brother of John, was also called James the elder. He and John were mending their nets by the Sea of Galilee when Jesus called them to follow him. James was there in the home of Jairus when Jesus raised his little daughter from the sleep of death. James was also present on the top of Mount Hermon and saw with his own eyes Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah. As one of Jesus' closest companions, James was one of the 3 disciples Jesus asked to accompany him in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he went to pray before his crucifixion. James' dedication and commitment to the faith are evident throughout his life as a disciple, even to his death, as James was the first martyr of the 12 disciples. John, son of Zebedee, was James's younger brother. John wrote many of the books of the New Testament. It is through his writing that we gain true insight into his personality and character. John is often referred to as the disciple of love or as the beloved. While John did write about the subject of love more than any other biblical author, this does not mean he was any less fiery, boisterous, and explosive as his older brother and the other fishermen who left their nets behind to follow Jesus and become fishers of men. John appears in many accounts of Jesus' teachings and miracles throughout the Gospels, making it clear that he was close to Jesus and was in the inner circle of disciples. As we look at John's journey as a disciple and leader in the early Christian movement, we find that John learned what he wrote and knew about love from Jesus. He was also a constant quest for truth. Through this unconditional love shown to him by Jesus, John was transformed and became one of the greatest writers of the New Testament. In the 4 biblical list of the disciples, the 5th name on every list is Philip. Philip was from Bethsaida in Galilee. Philip had an evangelistic heart. The first thing he did upon deciding to follow Jesus was to find his friend Nathanael and bring him to meet the Messiah, setting an example for us even today, that friendships provide the most fertile ground for evangelism and sharing the gospel. Philip is often named in the list of disciples who were with Jesus during many of his miracles and teachings. Jesus especially focuses on Philip during the feeding of the 5,000 when he charges Philip with the task of finding food for all the people. Philip was an administrative type, taking care of logistics, details, and organization. Upon Jesus' request to find food for all the people, Philip quickly replies that it cannot be done. It could be impossible to find food for so many people. It is at this moment that Jesus reminds Philip that he is the God of the impossible, as he performs the miracle of turning the 5 loaves and 2 fish into a meal for the entire crowd. Jesus restores Philip's faith in knowing that he has given his life to serve and follow the true Messiah. Nathanael was also called Bartholomew. There is not much mention of Nathanael in the scriptures beyond the list of disciples. But we can gather much about his character from the account of his calling into discipleship. Like many of the others, he was a fisherman. He was also a disciple of John the Baptizer. It was his friend Philip who came to him and said, "We have found him of whom the law and the prophets wrote. His name is Jesus of Nazareth." Nathanael was so surprised, he said, "Could any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Philip urged Nathanael to come and see. When Jesus met Nathanael, he looked at him and said, "Behold, an Israelite in which there is no dishonesty." Full of shock, Nathanael questioned how Jesus knew him. Jesus told him, "Before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree." That was all he needed. Nathanael was a believer and a follower. He was a man of integrity and honesty. Jesus described him as such upon their first meeting, and it was this sincerity of heart that led Nathanael to immediately dedicate his life to following Jesus. Jesus' act of washing feet of his disciples was the beginning of his ultimate display of humility, grace, and servanthood. In the moment, the disciples most likely did not realize the full meaning of this washing. But as the events of the evening and days to follow progressed, they would come to understand the significance of this act.